Alright, yet another topic that is criminally underrated, and we're here for it. From the wise king of memes, he says, I want to know more about what does the Atlas Academy do, especially their connection to the Wandering Sea. This is a faction, a part of the Mages Association that deserves way more time in the sun. The Atlas Temple, or Titan's Pit, is a part of the association that houses some of the oldest alchemists in the world. That being said, their main focus is alchemy. That's the magecraft they prioritize. The thing about their division is that they didn't see eye to eye with the Clock Tower's new train of thought of wanting to progress magecraft and take it into further avenues. They want to keep it relative to the Age of Gods. So there's a lot of disagreements between them and the Clock Tower, who are the body of the association. Though they're recognized as being a part of it, they kind of just do their own thing. We've seen parts of their system explored back in Camelot. You know, this is the same organization that Tsiah comes from. But what was their true purpose? What are they actually doing over there? So starting off with the actual name of the division, the term Atlas derives from the Titan of the same name that comes from Greek myth, Atlas. And if you've been through the 5th Lost Belt, you know that this was the servant of Kirshtaria, and we just barely got a glimpse of his figure during the chapter. Going back to the original myth, Atlas was the one that led the other Titans against the Greek gods. In the grand battle, the Titanomachia, he was at the forefront. He was second in command after Cronus. The thing is, the Titans ended up suffering defeat, and as one of their punishments, Zeus had forever cursed Atlas to hold up the heavens for the rest of his days. In other words, he would have the weight of the world placed on his shoulders for as long as he lived. The name of their institute and fate stems from that same idea. They've been tasked with holding up the world the same as Atlas. Whether people know it or not, without them, the world falls down. And the reason that we know this goes back to their first director, someone who goes unnamed. There was a prophecy that this director made that the world would come to an end. So ever since then, their division has been devoted to constantly creating weapons in preparation for this event. But they operate way differently than what you're normally used to. Where the other mages are usually focusing on brawn, the people of Atlas focus mostly on their intelligence. It also explains why Tsiah is such a forward thinker in the way that she plays her role in the story. So in between of them creating all of these mystic codes, getting ready for the apocalypse, came the 7 taboos, aka the 7 super weapons of Atlas, and they're the only ones that have access to them. They were made specifically to save the world, and thus each one of them has the power to destroy it, and all of them have been sealed away inside of Atlas, waiting for that fated time. And we've done an entire video covering this a while back, going into even greater detail. One of these weapons being the Black Barrel, which we've seen Mage use in FGO to go against a number of our strongest enemies, gods, primordials, and based on what we know from the story of Notes, where the original Black Barrel comes from, it can even take down the types, which are practically higher than gods. We've been through some of that also. The Black Barrel that's in Mage's possession is only a replica, and this is thanks to the fact of Tsiah being the one that had the original replica in the Tsukihime worlds. When the idea carried over to the Fate worlds, instead of her being the one that has it, since she's not doing the fighting, she did still have access to the blueprints and lent this over to Mage. So that's not even the real weapon, and it's that powerful. As a matter of fact, our survival thus far is largely thanks to us having the weapon to begin with. And let me just put things into perspective. We've had the world end going on 3 times. We get threatened of the world being destroyed like every other chapter, and we still haven't pulled out any of the actual weapons. You know what that tells us? Either lifting the seals on these weapons are more trouble than what you would ask for, or we haven't even gotten close to the worst that the world is going to bring us, and we've already been through it all. The idea of that alone is terrifying. So this is the main framework. Atlas are the people that's holding the strings together from behind the scenes, though you don't really see them get any credit. This whole time traveling, race shifting thing that we do in Fate Grand Order, how do you think we pull that off? A big part of that process was Chaldea just taking the ideas of Atlas and just remodeling them. Without their foundation, none of that happens. The whole operation falls apart. The main thing being their creation, Tri-Hermes, which is this huge computer database that gives access to all of Earth's history, past, present, and it even gives ballpark calculations for the future as well. Now you might be thinking, well, if they're supposed to be stopping the advent, they're doing a pretty bad job. Where are they at? And if you really look into them, there's so many caveats for this that you could probably make a list. For one, Atlas is a pretty well hidden institute. It's in the Atlas Mountains of Africa, but the headquarters itself is underground. And even if someone were to find their way into their headquarters, it's built in a way where people can get in, but nobody is getting out. It's built like a maze, and the only people that really know the labyrinth are the people that work there, and they don't leave either. They're the real hermits. Two, like I mentioned before, though they served as one part of the Mages Association, they don't exactly have the best ties with the clock tower because they have a different state of mind, and that separation happened all the way back in 20 AD. There's also the fact that Atlas has certain ties with the Holy Church in order to extend their mission, something that the clock tower isn't quite fond of. Kinda ironic considering that the clock tower also has secret ties with the Holy Church, but we expect no less. Hell, the Grail War itself is hosted in conjunction with the church. Apparently, the way that the clock tower sees it, they do it in a manner where they don't overstep the boundaries, even by their standards. 3, all of the world's information isn't the only thing in that computer database. It also contains all of Atlas's research and their hidden discoveries. It's been said outright multiple times that if a regular person or a magus tried to consume that information, it would literally destroy them. They would go mad. They might be able to skim a little bit of the information off the top, but nothing worth risking their lives to venture into their base for. They'd have no way of getting out, their chances are extremely low to begin with, and the base itself has auto defenses for anybody that tries to do this. You would need a divine spirit to be able to take that type of information in. Not someone that's part divine like Cuchulainn, but someone that could be recognized as a real deal deity. The average heroic spirit wouldn't cut it. They'd also get their saint graph destroyed trying to look into this info. What we saw from Sherlock when he went in was him just skimming through the information, and he's lucky that he's a genius, or the same would have happened to him as well. And one of the main reasons why they haven't been directly involved has been showcased through Tsiah. Sion's the one that saw that the alien god was coming and that they would try to destroy the Wandering Sea. She tried her best to tell everybody else, you know, Tsiah, even among the smartest of mages, was always a step ahead of her time, but they were so focused on what they were doing and they didn't want to accept the reality of the end coming that they didn't listen. Now, considering that this level of research that they're doing, trying to stop the advent, takes a heavy toll on their mental, it's been stated that every director that's been at Atlas eventually ended up going insane somewhere along the line. So it's important that they keep things tightly knit. The rest of the world couldn't even fathom it. One of their greatest rules, and one that they've had for over 2,000 years, is that you're forbidden from bringing their studies to the outside world, unless you have one of their bonding contracts, and there's less than 10 of them, Sion being in possession of one in FGO. For the way that they have the temple set up, they do have their own founding families, the same way the clock tower has the 12 lords. At Atlas, you have the 6 founding families known as the 6 sources that help bring the temple together. Sion, for one, in the Tsukihime worlds, when we run into her in the story, is the point where she's supposed to be the next head of her line. She was set up to be the next director after her ancestor Tsiah. But of course, going into the story, she ended up defecting after realizing her condition of becoming a dead apostle, among other things. As far as what happened to her ancestor Tsiah in the Fate worlds, in El Malloy, he's still around, he's still the director, and he's also a dead apostle. In FGO, he was the director for 500 years, and then he went completely missing. And then in the Tsukihime worlds, where he comes from, he ended up extending his research so far that it led him into becoming one of the dead apostle ancestors, one of those high tier dead apostles that I mentioned in my vampire video. The dude literally became a walking manifestation of a rumor. In fact, he's the one that ended up turning Sion in those worlds. When it comes to the founding families, the 6 sources, right now we know of 3 of them. Sion and Tsiah are a part of the Elnums. Those are the ones that I just mentioned. Since the art of alchemy focuses on the mind, body, and the soul, each one of these sources has a part of the body that they all specialize in. So the The Elnums, they focus on the nerves, and that's why Tsiah fights and processes information the way that she does, via her ether light. This is her mystic code. That's something else that we also covered in the 7 taboos. It lets her inject the code into the location of her choosing, and she can read the data of that person's soul via the nerves and make future calculations. So she can manipulate your own body against you and predict what you would possibly do from the information that she takes. Being that they're all families that focus on their wits first, each one of them has this. They all can predict your moves in whatever way that they prioritize in. That's another part of their thing. As I mentioned in the past, their magic circuits aren't great, so they're big brain. They focus mainly on their intelligence to outmaneuver the opponent. The other two families are mainly covered in the El Malloy series, one of which being the Crudelis family, who specializes in the manipulation of bones. Ladio, for instance, she's the heir to her family. She's been shown creating bone familiars in the form of animals and insects. And that's just what we've seen so far. The thing about her familiars is that instead of them just being regular, like say Medea's bone warriors or just an extension of the Magus themselves, her familiars focus as an actual counterpart to her. And this is thanks to the way that the alchemists operate, their memory partition. They have an ability to compartmentalize their mind into several different sections, so she can just put a part of her conscience into one of her familiars and create an entirely new entity that's still herself. And she's nothing to joke around with either. In El Malloy, we had a scene where Gray, Ren, and the composite being Ergo tried to fight against her all at one time, and none of them could beat her. Ren in particular hit her bone giant with the same spell that killed Heracles. Yes, that spell that one-shotted him and took his life, and the bone giant just regenerated. Ladio can create weapons from bones. She can manipulate them inside her body to increase her physical prowess outside what you would expect normally. Then the other family that we know about is the Ishtario, who specialize in the manipulation of skin. You got Giuseppe, for instance, who can melt things just by simply touching them. He's able to heat up his own skin and then transfer that over into whatever he gets his hands on. And then you have Quart, who can use his skin to dissolve things altogether. This includes changing the parameters of the said object that he touches, like the colors or the density. It gets extremely nuanced. What they're actually doing is manipulating the molecules themselves. And as far as the question about the relationship between the Wandering Sea and Atlas, going back to before, the Wandering Sea were also on the same wavelength as Atlas. They wanted to keep it old school. So naturally, they're more willing to work alongside each other than the both of them would the clock tower. In fact, one of the mages from the Wandering Sea actually invited Tsiah to be a part of them. This was Fabro. In other words, Nero in the Fate timelines, where he didn't become a dead apostle ancestor. And just based off of all of his abilities in the other worlds, we already know that he's extremely talented. And even he said that he wouldn't mind her joining. But of course, she ended up turning this down. There's plenty more to get into. There's an entire novel in El Malloy that's dedicated to Atlas. This is more so meant to just be an overview.